Okay, so just to get it out of the way, the name ballistic autistic is partially true of my overall personality because I can definitely, uh, my wife would definitely put it nicely. Maybe a temper tantrum. I don't know. No, she. Oh my god, my wife is amazing. So no, yeah. I mean, there are times, I guess I should just jump into it. I am a 31-year-old autistic male. I don't know. Do you still say he, him? I don't get these whole pronoun things, but that's beyond the point and scope of what we're trying to cover. This is just meant to be kind of like overall my thoughts. This will be completely anonymous. I don't think there's really need to put a name to this. This is just gonna be a fun little thing. I talk about my thoughts, talk about my life experiences as someone who's grown up on the spectrum. Actually, I'm very fortunate uh, to be high functioning on the spectrum. It really sucks because like Asperger's is not really the thing anymore. It's more or less all about everything's just blanketed now as the ASD, autism spectrum disorder. I feel like I got my like special niche taken away from me, which wasn't like something I knew until recently. Like because I started to really be part of joining like the subreddit groups of Asperger's and autism on Reddit, and like, oh, that's not really a thing anymore. It's just all ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Like, oh, I lost my fun little word that sound really funny, like Asperger's. Asperger's? No, There's a P in there. Well, anyway, so a big point of my goal with this show is, yeah, again, talk about my life experiences. Hopefully, leave some encouragement for those who deal with living and with autism and growing up on the spectrum, and because there's such a, I mean, spectrum of us out there. Um, so hopefully that all works out, and I'm just gonna have fun with this. So I guess kind of like the main thing, I grew up with it. I wasn't diagnosed till I was up in the fourth grade. I'm 31 now, so keep in mind it was a brand new thing up in the 90s of autism, let alone because of my high functioningness. High functioningness? That's not a word. But being high functioning, just being labeled with Asperger's, being an Aspie. And yeah, that was actually really revealing because, there's just no idea. I was really fortunate. Oh, man, going to school, it was so difficult. I was bullied. I mean, when you're different, you're obviously going to be bullied. There's really kind of no avoiding that. Like, especially me going through that, it stopped as soon as I kind of like stood up for myself. So uh, I'm not. I'm definitely anti-bullying because there's definitely a certain level where you kind of need to, like, there's definitely boundaries of what you should be doing to get away with. Kids are super. Kids suck when they're little and teenagers, and then they don't get out of that. Then they suck as adults too. Oh well. Anyway, so yeah, so growing up, fighting the school districts, getting help, especially at that time's like only kid that's kind of like that, and then jumping around with different needs. I didn't really get good help until middle school and high school because I got to go to a really great program that was like run by, or at least taught by. I couldn't figure out how it was run by, but at least there was two teachers that were specifically trained to work with kids with autism and ADHD and other um, behavioral slash learning disabilities. And that was really awesome because the big part was the program. You still had your core classes where you do like they try to get you slowly full blown like regular general ed or the general classes with the regular students, and then like half your classes were also with the students that were with the learning disabilities. But part of that program too is like we had an actual behavioral therapist come in and we do like role playing. That was like the biggest help growing up with the behavioral therapist. So when I've done public speaking um, about what's helped me growing up and what parents need to do to help their kids, like I was like therapies, because especially it's like, and I think this is kind of pretty true. And I'm gonna throughout my podcast, I'm definitely gonna speak in brushes of generalizations. Guess what? If it doesn't apply to you, don't get upset. Obviously, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about stereotypes and generalizations. People do that to get the conversation moving along because, That's just how it is. Like, Jesus Christ, don't get upset. Generally, ha. That's just that behavioral therapy really, really helped because, you know, the role playing was the big advantage because you learn the rules, especially as someone on the spectrum. And I feel like this is pretty much true. Is like we're kind of brought up that there's rules that you're supposed to follow, societal rules, behavior rules, and because we have a difficulty like linking our behavior to what's not acceptable, that role playing really, really helps. So by doing that and learning how to communicate with other students, how to communicate with other teachers, because like obviously our teachers were trained to understand like, oh, he didn't really mean it in that way. Like this is what he meant. I mean, and I had to deal with that all through growing up and through elementary school, like just teachers not understanding where I was coming from. I mean, that's just purely what it was. They didn't get me. And I obviously didn't know how to communicate correctly either. So, I mean, that was the big advantage of going through those programs that I was really fortunate in. And there's definitely, I have no idea how many programs are like that today, but it's like if there's a program available like that for any kid, you know, if this is a parent or someone else, like I really hope that, you know, they are able to find that. Yeah, so, yeah. But yeah, 31, married now 11 years, to an, again, amazing wife who puts up with me and all my quirkiness, that's for sure. And then always upbuilding and encouraging. I mean, on our first date, I totally just came straight on, just like, hey, just to let you know, if this really wants to go any further, yeah, I have autism. I have Asperger's. And she was like super awesome. She's like, okay, and she didn't get it, but she like dived right into researching really what that meant. And you know, she's like, all right, you know, you're just quirky, and yeah, so like my family still, I get a lot of passes on my behavior, unfortunately, still from my family on like, oh, he's just autistic. Like, yeah, maybe, but I'm also either trying to crack a joke or I am being a little rude. But oh well, that's no here nor there. But just as someone that grown up, you know, it just sucks because when you see those that are struggling, and you know, I know I'm really fortunate for being as high functioning as I am. Especially there's like such a large talent pool. Like I'm not blessed with any like the really good gifts of autism. Like I'm nerdy and geeky and like definitely come off intelligent in some conversations because I definitely love absorbing information, statistics and facts and news articles and science articles, and I spend a lot of time on the internet. But I mean, my you know, there's still a lot of those, and predominantly males on the spectrum, like that, you know, are lower functioning. Like that's why, you know, I really like some of the shows, kind of that, you know, kind of reflect, you know, life with autism. So like Atypical on Netflix, and that new show that, well, Love on the Spectrum, Love on the Spectrum. Yeah, Love on the Spectrum. That dating show, following some people in Australia. I think, yeah, they were Australia, and so like seeing just how different I am from them is just kind of like just shows reminds me like, oh, I'm really fortunate of, you know, not having it as bad, but at the same time, because it's not as bad, it really kind of sucks sometimes because you feel like, do I fit in that? Like with them, you kind of see the disability in their actions, whereas me, it's so intermittent, and even to some might be minute to the point where it's like, do you have autism? So it's like I don't get that benefit of like, oh, you look or sound autistic, or you come off as autistic. They're like, oh, maybe it's just one point, yeah, you just come off like a jerk, like, or other times they're like, all right, just unusual, but yeah, no, that's the only thing that can kind of suck. But you know, dealing with those that have a hard time, you know, living on their own and coping on their own, or literally just want that sense of community. Oh man, I'm editing it out. It is what it is. I don't really want to edit this. But going back, so I always had this really awesome idea, which I wish I could find a way. Maybe as I continue to make this podcast and I try to reach out and figure this whole thing out, I real wish that there was a system in place, maybe a way to create, not necessarily business, but a community oriented around helping those that have a hard time living on their own, but obviously don't want to deal with loneliness. So like basically the idea is to have like this awesome campus or maybe like a dormitory or some sort. I guess realistically it would work best as like an apartment, small apartment complex, dormitory style, where like each tenant has like their own space, maybe like a couple hundred square feet. So it's not like tiny. They don't want prison cell. We don't want prison cell size rooms. They need their space so they can decorate and work. And that would be like the awesome part is that they're able to work from home, especially now with COVID. Everyone works from home. So like, but the idea was that like you have a system in place in this dormitory where if they're not the best at, let's say, housekeeping, there's housekeeping system assistants available, and or cooking. So make sure that they don't have horrible diets, because a good diet was for some is really important. Like me, I've experimented a little bit like with probiotics and different stuff. I'd love done research on that, and I'll probably talk about that in another podcast. But like, so dietary help, and then also like I mentioned before in the earlier podcast, like about doing the behavioral therapy part. So there's a therapy or therapist, behavioral therapists, or even just straight up therapists or psychologists available on site, or that there's like an office space in the building to help them out with whatever they're going through. But also, what would be really amazing is, because it's kind of crazy, the unemployment in the U.S. is, for those on the spectrum, it's like 80+%. I can't remember the exact statistic. I know it's definitely over 80. I think it's like 85, not quite 90%. So between 80 and 90%. But anyway, but to have a system in place where that you have like, because obviously there's an amazing talent, and a lot of them are in tech. So like a lot of us are males that are on the spectrum, and a lot of us really love technology, and a lot of us are great with computers. Me, I'm mediocre, but I seem like I should be working for Apple Genius, according to my mom. I was like, "Oh, you figured it?" Like, I'm not that great with computers. I'm okay. I'm definitely very highly proficient, and I can do a lot of my own stuff. But as soon as you need a viral removal, definitely don't come to me. You need to go to someone that's way better at what they're doing. Anyway, so jumping back. Oh my gosh, I go all over the place. Jumping back. The idea would be to have someone who can advocate for them, or basically help them with employment, get them the job, but also be the go-between the employer and the person on the spectrum that would be the employee. So if they're having issues with like an HR issue, for as a prime example, like say there's a issue with hygiene or some other thing, or there was a misunderstanding between another employee with their communications, help them out with like advocating for them, so that way like to help with that employment position, and then maybe even just have the whole building set up where they can work from home. So good security information, and have these guys work on the security of the building, like make that whole place like you know kind of like let the crazies run the insane asylum. So help them, give them the freedom to, do what they need to, because it's really meant to be their safe haven, their fortress of solitude with their community, their village, and, help them out so that way the infrastructure of it is what they need to, function and be comfortable in. Let them, have those basic systems in place, but encourage them to, do their own, movie parties, or theme parties, or whatever that they need to do. Have them take some responsibility and encourage that community among themselves. Obviously there are going to be some that are more reclusive, but help them out, so that way really finding that niche and ability to encourage one another, and have that, again, community is the big thing, so you don't feel like you're just tossed out by society and that you don't have a place. Find these brilliant minds, because that, there's a lot of similar interests that people don't realize. Like some, here's a perfect example of, Love on the Spectrum. One guy's like super insanely obsessed with dinosaurs. Helping him, that's probably such a niche thing, but I'm sure that, there can be things as tour guides or other examples of that, where you can help them with employment. Bottom line is to be like the advocate for them, and negotiating even like their salaries if need be, in some, like say, a big tech industry where they're doing coding or whatever. So take some of the paycheck that'll cover their housing and all that, and then the rest of it goes into some sort of trust, where that way it's not being stolen from them. And so that way they have their spending money, but at least then their daily necessities are taken care of. And obviously, like something like this would like require regular auditing to prevent, people like that's just like what's the thing that sucks. Like everything gets corrupted, and there's always someone sleazy that gets involved, and unscrupulous characters. So, I mean, I think it's definitely got to be a way to set something like that up, and then like I said, it's just like this grandiose idea, and maybe it's not realistic. Maybe it is. I mean, I hope it is. Maybe I can figure out a way to make it happen down the line. Just the overall concept just makes a lot of sense to me. Like having a place that you know where parents know, because that's the concern with a lot of parents is their concern is what's going to happen to my kid when I die. If I'm not there to take care of them, who's going to take care of them? Like, is the government going to take care of them? Like, we see how well the government handles a lot of stuff, and some programs are great, but usually they're more in a minor assistance in a way. Like, they're not hand over foot guiding and encouraging them per se. They're not instrumental in a sense of the every aspect of their life. Whereas like what I'm talking about is like a again like that support system that is there and accessible 24/7, and same thing that having that community there 24/7, and eventually expanding it, and that would be brilliant. It's like you go into major areas that have where you know they can be helped, and hopefully it's not just tech industry guys, but guys who also have talents in other things, whether they're not autistic, artistic, artistic, or specializes in just like a very niche knowledge. I mean, there's always a place for everyone, I feel, and especially in this day and age, with technological day and age, where it's things with podcasting, things with social media, there's just a way to find your place and also capitalize on it. Like, I mean, it's not always about necessarily becoming rich, but it's also just about making that livelihood available, so it's like you're not on the street either. So, I mean, something I can hopefully figure out, or maybe people hear about this and they're able to, you know, contribute, make it this a reality. It's like I don't need to be a part of it 100% or any percentage. Like I just would love to hear and know about something like this that existed, and encourage people to find and search out. I mean, I guess that's just the hopeful side of me. That's not the general pessimist that I sometimes, or realist, pessimist, combination of both that I sometimes am. I don't know. That's just like one idea, and just part of my interest. Like, hopefully, like something like that happens, and doing more public speaking on the matter, it would be really fun. But yeah, I guess just kind of getting back to me a little bit more. It's like, besides that, like I just get so focused on these different ideas. I mean, that's kind of happens with kind of anything I get into. Like, I love finding new hobbies, as my wife. It's like, what's the next expensive hobby you'll get into? It's like, I don't know. How much money is in the bank account? Uh, I mean, I've had a lot of fun. Like right now, like my favorite, really, I'm just super obsessed with, and love a lot right now is super into archery right now, and I'm just having a lot of fun with that. I would love to do a tournament, but man, COVID's just put a halt to everything. And the thing that's just kind of scary is like, are we getting to the point where we're learning to live with, to function in a pandemic? Like, it's so crazy, man. I don't know. But I really love archery. I love like figuring out, like when I first got into like my main job as a dog groomer is like start learning about tons of stuff about dog grooming, and then you learn, and then you just like absorb, and like that was my goal. Like when I first got into it, like absorb, absorb, absorb. So it's like when I get into a new hobby, like archery is like absorb, 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 like everything about archery, like learning about things like FOC, front of center, learning about kinetic energy, learning about different draw weights and flight patterns and fletchings and arrow stiffness and broadhead weights and broadhead patterns, and the different kind of tournament styles. So learning, Olympic recurve, and then field archery, indoor archery, 3D archery. I mean, it's kind of crazy how many different archery platforms There are, and it's kind of crazy. Like almost every single one of them requires its own bow, which makes it a crazy expensive hobby. So it's like I just try to focus on, you know, I just try to get myself a single bow that I can kind of go between like an indoor 3 spot archery or even like the 5-1. So it's like just this very stagnant, you know, 20-yard shot, and then like I can still use that same bow to do like outdoor 3D archery where you shoot at the foam animals. And like it seems that like, and that has different levels to it too. Like there's super pro archers that they have unmarked, so you have no idea what the yardage or the range is on the animal. So you're literally guessing. And then there's other ones where it's like, oh, it tells you pretty much where you didn't need dial in your scope, so it's like a lot easier. Like that's what I would do. Like I definitely probably don't have a great judge of distance and just figuring out on the fly of like, is this 20 yards or is this 23.5? Like just that little bit of difference would be, it's like crazy how much. Well, it kind of depends on your arrow flight again, like how much your arrow's going to drop, like how fast is it flying. So like all that different and difficult details, like I like diving into. And then like my other thing, like I love golfing because I did that a ton as a kid. And just over the years, just it's super relaxing. I love golfing. I don't get to do it much right now because it's also an expensive sport. But once you have the clubs, then it's not like you just have to spend the $30 to like $80 depending on the high end course. Fortunately, like if you find your local courses, there can be cheap ones, especially like a small par 3. But that can be super fun. And then like I was into cycling for and this is probably embarrassing, but whatever. I got into cycling because of an anime, which was, what was it called? Mata Peta something. I can't remember what it is. It was like a cycling anime. I was like, all right, that seems like fun. Thought about riding to work, and I totally got into it. Finally got my bike, and I was riding 11 miles to work. 12 miles, 11 miles, forget, right around there. And then I'd ride home, and I was like even training for a full-on what they call a century ride, which is a 100-mile race. And I was prepping for that, but unfortunately I got injured and got a concussion and shredded up my shoulder and leg. So I was into that for like a good year, but not long after that because I was just kind of like the bike I had. I just didn't want to use the bike I had. Just like super paranoid. And I think that was just like my autism because like I love cycling, but like I didn't trust that bike anymore and I couldn't get my head around it. So I stopped cycling. And then, of course, also photography. Love my photography, and I love shooting weddings and all that, which is kind of crazy when you count like, oh, have autism, but you can do weddings. It's super high stress, high, you know, risk scenario. Like, it's super important to like not mess that up. But I love shooting photos and doing all that, and I did like when I first got into that deep diving, like just researching all the different cameras from Canon to Nikon to Sony to Fuji, which is now what I now shoot. Figuring out all the differences between the megapixels and dynamic range, and then the software and computer hardware, and so I get crazy into expensive hobbies because none of those were cheap. My wife again, it's like, oh my god, but yeah. So I mean, that's just kind of getting a little bit about me, and I definitely want to do more podcasts, kind of just on anything that's kind of finding interesting. Anything that I can find, because I did try to do more research on autism in general, especially like figuring out what works dietarily. So like I even tried um, keto diet and all that, and like I mentioned before, like doing introducing probiotics, which is really cool. When I was doing research, I try to kind of do research on the two ends of like the autism debate, specifically on vaccines. Like, did they cause or do they cause autism? Do they not? Like, I definitely side with that vaccines predominantly don't, but there's still question marks there that people shouldn't be ashamed of asking. I think vaccines are still important, and that they do protect majority of the children without harm, and they do majority of good. But the system that we have in place is, why is it going on so unquestioned that when you question it, you come off as a conspiracy theorist, and then it's conspiracies. Those are always fun to like figure out all the crazy minutia of it. But going back to vaccines is, you know, maybe it is safer to spread them out a little bit more instead of doing so many at once. Maybe, what is the inflammation process that's happening in the brain? How can we disregard the correlation causation of, autism happening when vaccines are being introduced? I mean, I don't know. I don't even have like finding out, because I'm definitely would have to say I would highly recommend parents consider vaccines, but I'm not a parent. I don't have any intention of having kids. It's a difficult decision. I could probably predominantly say if I had a kid, they would definitely get their vaccines. I mean, but I know for a fact I'd never wanted kids, and I took care of that. A little snip snap, and that's a lot of information, but oh well. uh, but it's not an easy decision. I get why parents are scared. You are predominantly looking for the best interest of your kid, but now with everything going out that's being politicized with the stupid COVID masking and social distancing, it's nothing is everything's being made black and white now. Nothing has that middle ground of gray, which especially as someone who's autistic is like, I definitely get that. Like, we definitely have the tendency to want to live in a world of black and white, but I've definitely had to train myself to like, maybe there is that nuance that hopefully we don't misconstrue. It's like, why can't we ask those questions and not be ashamed of questioning the authority figures? Like, isn't it possible that there's just a poor communication of why something needs to be a certain way? Like, if you can't explain thoroughly, maybe you're not doing a good job educating the public. Maybe that's really the issue. If it's really so safe, if it's really such not an issue, or this kind of pertains to any kind of idea. It's like, if your side is right, you shouldn't have a hard time explaining simply and thoroughly to appease anyone that has questions. The problem is time. No one wants to take the time. No, and a lot of us don't have the time to do that. I mean, that's kind of what it is. So we dig our heels into these ideas and concepts and thoughts and beliefs because it's like, I don't have the time to change them, so I'm just going to stick to it because that seems to sound good to me at the moment. And so we decide to fight and argue over it. Like, okay, I get it. I love a good fight and an argument. And I love just pointing out the facts because I'm definitely one that like, oh yeah, these are the facts. This is what I read from this scientist on this article, from this, from this program that was from this institute. I 100% get that. And, but the question is like, are you blinded by not accepting that possibility that information changes? Look how many times information changed when COVID first started. It was like, mask no, mask yes. Don't go outside, go outside. Sun kills it instantly. Now everyone eats at restaurants outdoors. Like, what the heck is going on? Anyway, so I'm going to try and keep this up. A weekly thing. I don't know how long, but I just want to hopefully keep this fun and exciting. So thanks if you listen to the end. So if you have any questions for me, I'm definitely an open book in general. I try to be open and honest as much as possible. So feel free to, if you caught me at the end of this, I'm definitely reachable at ballisticautisticpod@gmail.com. If you want information or questions, or if you have literature information for me, if like I touched on something that I sounded completely ridiculous on, and you have source, like don't just email me like anything, like have some sources attached. I'm definitely open for discussion. I'm willing to adjust my thinking on pretty much anything. I don't think I'm kind of married to my thoughts. I like pondering and going down these long rabbit holes of thoughts. So hopefully that works out. So thanks so much for listening, anyone and everyone. And if you liked what you heard, if you liked what you heard, share with a friend. If you didn't, share with a friend of me. Either way, I would love it if you shared the podcast. All right. Adios.